The HHKB is one of my favorite keyboards of all time, but the first time I tried it, I ended up hating it. This keyboard uses a rubber dome switch called Topra, and when you buy this keyboard, it comes stock with either 45 or 55 gram domes, which, if you're like me, this is pretty heavy for daily use. After trying to give it a go, I ended up selling my first one, but then did more research and decided to buy it again. I ended up putting lighter domes in here, and it quickly became one of my favorite boards. Most people think that a plastic keyboard or something that is mass-produced is bad, but little do you know that this keyboard is your favorite keyboarder's favorite keyboard.
Well, there's several reasons. One of it does stem from sentimentality, I guess. I did start off on Topra with my keyboard journey, and at first I didn't really appreciate it. And it wasn't until I had tried MX switches and a lot of the other options that are available that then I realized, oh, Topra was actually a really nice switch. I just didn't know at the time. I think Topra is kind of an example of you can make rubber domes feel nice and sound good with the right type of design. And there's just something about the collapsing of a rubber dome that it's really hard to mimic with a mechanical plastic on plastic action. Yeah, so I think the reason why I like Topra so much is it's not necessarily great for gaming per se, but just for like general typing, which is the majority of the typing that I do, it's just a nice, comfortable feeling that I can always come back to a knobbly board.
And what was your first Topra board? You said you started off the hobby with Topra switches.
Yeah, it was the Real Force 104 UG High Pro.
Nice. Do you still have that board?
I do. It's very dirty. I've never cleaned it.
In an effort for other people not to dislike this board, I'm going to go over how to tune your HHKB and every single tip and trick that I've learned to make the process a lot easier. We'll go over everything from taking it apart, reassembly, modding, and everything in between. Okay, so let's start off with all the tools you will need. I highly recommend getting a tray. I'm using a nice little cam tray here to make sure I don't lose any of the screws or internals. Today I'm just going to be using 2 different screwdrivers, and I have a spudger, but this is optional. It's super easy to lose these things, and it's pretty frustrating if that happens, so highly recommend keeping yourself organized. As far as lube goes, I just use Krytox 205G0. Everyone's going to have their own opinion on this. Some people do opt for a lighter lube on the sliders, but if you lube carefully, I really don't think it matters all that much. I also replace the domes because I think stock domes are way too heavy, and I also add silencing rings. If you grabbed an HHKB Type S, your board will already have these rings. Before you take apart the board, you are going to have to take off all the keycaps. If you don't do this, you can't remove the sliders. Once you've taken everything off, to take apart the board, grab your size 0 screwdriver and unscrew the top 3 screws on the underside of the board. Be careful as you pull apart the case because you do have a cable connecting the PCB and the daughter board. Once you have these 2 pieces separated, you can slowly take off the cable from the daughter board. You can softly wiggle the cable side to side to help it release a little bit easier. Now that you have these 2 pieces separated, you can grab your screw tray and start to unscrew everything. After this step, you can carefully take off the PCB and the domes. The PCB is pre-lubed from the factory, so that's why the domes will stay intact on the PCB. If you plan on using stock domes, you can just keep them on. However, if you do plan on replacing the domes, do this next step very carefully. You can gently peel off each dome slowly enough so the springs stay on the PCB. Do your best to make sure you don't lose any of these, as it's pretty frustrating if you can't find every single one. Once you've taken off the domes, you can put the springs on your tray and then you'll be good to go. Now it's time to pop out the sliders from the top case. You can do this with your finger if you just push, but if that ends up hurting after doing the whole board, you can grab your spudger to give yourself a little extra help. Sometimes you'll see these little plastic shavings come off the sliders, but this is not an issue. Now that everything's taken apart, we can go over the anatomy of the board. So you have your case, your PCB, daughter board, sliders, domes, springs, and keycaps. This PCB is electrocapacitive, meaning that when you compress the dome and spring, it sends a signal that a key has been actuated. This is pretty cool. When each slider is out, I would highly recommend grabbing a microfiber towel and wiping off any dust or factory lube. Once they're clean, now is the best time to decide if you're going to use silencing rings. It's best to do this before lubing so you don't accidentally put in a slider without one of these rings installed. It's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is push the ring around the slider. Just make sure to not bend or crease the ring during this process. After you've prepped all of the sliders, you can grab your lube and brush of choice. It's very important to note that you should lube very lightly here. When I do this, I just graze my brush along the inside of the jar and try and get residual lube on my brush. Less is definitely more here, nothing worse than an over-lubed keyboard. Then once you grab your top case, you just need to lube the two cutouts where the slider fits into the housing. I like to go back and forth on each side just to make sure that it's as even as possible. There's a couple different ways you can go about making sure you don't re-lube the same housing twice. The first method is just lubing a single housing and then pressing your slider in right away. I find this takes a little bit too long, so the second method is to place one of your fingers as a marker, lube that housing, and then after you've done that, slide your finger down. I do this for the entire row, and then once that row is done, I put in all of the sliders, and then I just move on to lubing the next one. Once you've inserted everything, you can give the case a nice little shake to see if anything is over-lubed or not. Unlike MX style keyboards, when you're tuning the stabilizers, I only tune the wire. Before this step, I like to just take everything out, take off the wire and clean it up a little bit, and then just put everything back together. For left, shift, and enter, it's good to put on a silencing ring now if you are going to silence your board, and then snap these back into the housing. Every stabilizer wire is going to be south-facing, so in other words, the wire should be on the underside of the key, and these will have to be snapped back into place. And then now everything is set. All you have to do is coat the wire. I personally just like to use Krytox for this step. Don't use BDZ. The amount of boards I've come across that have BDZ caked over the entire wire and that seeps into the sliders to make them sluggish, it's just terrible. So just stick to 205, I promise you it'll be enough. And if you do this very carefully, you'll be just fine. When you're lubing, it's good to make sure that you get under the hooks because this is likely where the most rattle is gonna come from. You can move the wire side to side to make sure everything spreads evenly across the housing. And for the spacebar, I just lube the wire along each bend, but only throughout the housing. I don't lube the wire outside of that actual contact point. Once you've lubed the stabs, we are ready to reassemble the board. So my favorite method is the book method, and we're going to line up the left and the right sides of the top case and place them on. This way it allows the sliders to fall down, so it makes it very easy to place the domes back into the housing without any error. If you're using aftermarket domes like myself, these are going to come in strips of 4 instead of a big sheet, so you'll have to cut individual ones for keys like the stabilizer keys as well as the bottom row. Make sure that when you place the domes down that the cutouts are aligned properly. The alignment is a little different on the stabilizer keys, and you can kind of see this with the little cutout there. While I can't give a one-to-one comparison for these domes to MX springs, the MX springs that I use are typically around 55 grams, and these domes here are 35 grams. If you like a spring weight for your MX keyboard around 60 grams, I'd recommend trying the 42 desk key domes. Now we're ready to put the springs back in, and you can start putting these into each key and lightly tap to make sure that they're flush. If you find out you're missing a spring, what you can do is just gently tap each spring to make sure that 2 are not stuck together. If you find out that 2 are stuck together, you can pick them up and carefully drop them on your tray and they'll just pop right apart. Once you have a spring in each key, you can grab your PCB and put it back onto the board. All you have to do is align the 2 plastic pins on your board, and it makes it very easy just to drop the PCB down. To start, I would recommend just putting screws in the 4 corners and 1 to 2 in the center. It's smart to triple check all of the domes have been seated correctly once you only have 6 of these screws installed. If there are any domes that need to be reseated, it's much easier just to unscrew a couple screws as opposed to all of them. I like to test my stabs after this step, so once all 6 are screwed down, flip your board back over, nothing's gonna fall apart, and grab your stabilizer keys. Snap these onto the board, and then you can just check your stab work. Because we're putting metal screws into a plastic board, don't over tighten as it can ruin your keyboard if you strip the threads and blow these out. You've probably noticed that I'm not using the stock PCB. And a big reason why I do this is so I can use this aftermarket kit by Cipulot. The best part about this is that you can use VIA, which gives you the ability to remap everything, which you can't do with a stock PCB. Because we're modding this board to use a USB-C connector instead of USB mini, we're gonna have to cut out the case a little bit. I'm gonna place the daughter board into the bottom case and just eye to make sure that I can start cutting in the correct spot. The plastic is really soft, so just gently shave out the case with something like a Swiss Army knife. Don't go too crazy. You don't want to hack away at this and just have a huge ass hole. So if you're happy with it, then you can screw down the daughter board and just make sure everything looks good. Now we can test the keys to make sure they're registering. For a stock PCB, you can just use keyboardchecker.com. And if you're using the Cipulot PCB, you can just go ahead and use VIA. I'm leaving out some crucial steps that you have to do to configure your Cipulot PCB, but I'm gonna link both of these videos in the description. If all of your keys are working and you're happy with the stabilizers, you can insert the bottom case clips together and then close the case. Rescrew the 3 case screws, and then you can pop in all the keycaps. I don't know about y'all, but inserting Topra keycaps is so satisfying. My last recommendation is to get these little bump-on feet from primekb. They're these little rubber stickers that keep your board from sliding around while typing. I just cut the sticker into fourths and then place them around the little circles at the top of each corner. And that's about it. I won't even lie, I was pretty intimidated to do this my first time, so the goal of this video was to make sure that anyone could do this without feeling those same kind of nerves. All right, well, that wraps up how to mod and hopefully love your HHKB. If there's anything I didn't touch on or you have any other tips, please drop them below. If you pick one up, let me know. And yeah, happy typing.